With drones that often cost only a few $1,000s, Ukrainian forces have wiped out Russian targets worth millions in a single night, deep inside forests and along the Donetsk front line. And the scale of loss is forcing hard questions about how this war is now being fought. Recent battlefield footage shows Ukrainian FPV drones flying in dense numbers after dark, moving through wooded areas and approach routes where Russian infantry try to hide, regroup, and prepare for the next push. Yet discovery now comes faster than movement. Thermal cameras pick up body heat under trees, along paths, and near shelters, turning night cover into a liability rather than protection. The damage goes far beyond individual soldiers or single vehicles. What is emerging is a steady erosion of Russia's ability to hide safely, move supplies, and store ammunition near the front, even under darkness. Positions once considered secure are being exposed from above, while reaction time shrinks to seconds. If these images reflect the wider reality on the ground, FPV drones are no longer a supporting tool on the battlefield. They are actively shaping tempo, weakening fire support, disrupting logistics, and forcing constant adaptation under pressure. Cheap systems are removing expensive hardware, and losses are repeating night after night rather than in rare strikes. The key question now is why camouflage, dugouts, and even rocket artillery systems keep getting found and destroyed, and how far this shift will push the frontline balance in the weeks ahead. FPV drones operating at night are turning forested areas into exposed ground, because thermal sensors allow Ukrainian crews to detect Russian infantry even when visual cover still looks intact from the ground. In recent night operations, FPV teams move slowly through wooded zones and along approach roads, scanning for heat signatures that stand out under tree canopies and near narrow paths. And once a signal appears, the engagement often begins within moments. Infantry positions that rely on darkness and foliage lose their main advantage, since body heat, movement pauses, and breathing patterns become visible through thermal imaging, even when soldiers remain still. Footage from these missions shows Russian troops spreading into small groups instead of advancing in larger formations, which reflects a clear adjustment under constant drone pressure rather than a planned assault posture. This dispersion reduces the chance of a single strike hitting many soldiers at once, but it also creates gaps between units and weakens mutual support during contact. When a drone detects one group, nearby elements are often too far away to react in time or provide cover fire, which leaves each cluster exposed to a separate engagement. Early detection changes the entire sequence of the fight, because FPV pilots do not need to wait for ground contact or supporting fire to confirm targets. Once a heat source is identified, the drone can circle, adjust altitude, and choose the angle that limits escape routes, while infantry on the ground may not even realize they are being tracked. This shortens the decision window from minutes to seconds, and it removes the traditional buffer that forests once provided during night movement. The pressure created by this system forces Russian infantry into constant trade-offs that are difficult to manage in real conditions. Staying still may reduce noise, but it does not hide thermal output, while moving risks revealing direction and speed to a drone already overhead. Small groups can slip through gaps during brief moments, yet the same dispersion makes it harder to coordinate withdrawal once contact begins. As a result, engagements often end with isolated targets rather than extended firefights. Another key detail visible in night footage is how FPV crews prioritize control over pace rather than immediate destruction. Drones track movement patterns first, then wait for moments when a target pauses under cover or slows near obstacles, which increases strike accuracy and limits wasted sorties. This approach shows that the goal is not simply to score hits, but to deny safe passage through forest corridors that Russian units rely on to reach forward positions. Over time, this method reshapes how the front line functions after dark. Forest belts that once served as staging areas now act as filters where movement is observed, sorted, and interrupted before contact with Ukrainian ground forces occurs. Infantry that attempts to cross these zones does so under constant risk, while commanders face delays and uncertainty that build before any major engagement begins. The open question raised by this pattern is whether spreading into smaller groups truly increases survival, or whether it turns each movement into a separate hunt that favors drones with patience and visibility. Even in daylight, traditional concealment methods are breaking down once FPV drones enter close range, because visual tracking and constant motion are exposing Russian infantry faster than ground reactions can adjust. Footage from recent engagements shows Russian soldiers reacting the moment a drone appears overhead. Some stop moving instantly, others rush toward the nearest tree or bush, while a few try to flatten themselves against the ground. The FPV continues forward, holding altitude briefly, then dropping lower as the distance closes, and the pilot confirms shape, posture, and direction of movement. In open woodland and tree lines, soldiers often press tight to trunks or crouch under branches, relying on shadows and broken outlines to avoid detection. From above, the drone shifts laterally and adjusts angle, using sunlight and contrast to separate bodies from the background. Once the outline is clear, the FPV stabilizes, circles once, and commits to the approach. Standing still becomes a visible pattern in daylight footage. Soldiers pause mid-step, freeze beside roots, or remain half-hidden behind thin cover, assuming that reduced movement lowers attention. The drone hovers briefly, then slides to one side, keeping the target centered while closing distance. What appears as caution from the ground turns into a fixed reference point from the air. Hiding behind trees follows the same sequence. Foliage blocks direct ground-level sight, yet from above it creates narrow vertical lanes where bodies must fit. FPV pilots use these gaps, descending between branches and adjusting speed to avoid clipping leaves. As range decreases, uniforms, helmets, and gear contrast against bark and soil, removing the visual cover that daylight concealment depends on. Camouflage clothing appears frequently, draped over shoulders or wrapped around equipment as movement slows. At longer distance, it breaks shape briefly, but once the drone pushes closer, the human form becomes clear again. The FPV corrects course, holds alignment, and continues forward without pause. The added fabric changes timing slightly, but it does not alter the direction of the engagement. As the drone enters the final approach, infantry responses become frantic. Weapons are raised and short bursts are fired upward, often too early or offline as the FPV changes direction. The drone does not follow a straight path, instead cutting left or right to avoid fire, then correcting back onto target. In several clips, hesitation is visible second by second. Soldiers begin to run, stop again, then try to choose between deeper cover or open ground. During this delay, the FPV closes the remaining distance. Each encounter resolves quickly. There is rarely time for coordination with nearby troops since dispersion and terrain isolate each target. Across multiple daytime engagements, the pattern repeats with little variation. Freezing, hugging cover, or trusting camouflage leads into the same closing arc by the drone. The battlefield does not erupt into chaos, but instead moves through a steady rhythm where decisions become harder and reactions arrive too late. Over time, these repeated encounters begin to shape behavior before contact even starts. Movement along approach routes slows, pauses become longer, and soldiers hesitate earlier when crossing exposed ground. Delay from soldiers or troops gives FPV pilots more time to observe, reposition, and select the moment to strike. What this phase of fighting shows is not a failure of discipline, but a daylight battlefield where close-range FPV pressure steadily removes the space in which traditional infantry reactions once worked. When the battlefield became more tense, rocket artillery leaves a trail that FPV crews can read, and that trail is now leading directly to the destruction of BM-21 Grad launchers hidden near the front line. During recent operations, Ukrainian drone pilots began by scanning forest edges and open patches for disturbed soil and burn marks that appear after rocket launches. These signs remain visible even after the launchers move, because exhaust blasts tear into the ground and scorch vegetation in a way that stands out under aerial sensors. Once these indicators appear, the search narrows quickly, since a grad unit cannot relocate far without exposing tracks, fresh compression marks, or cleared paths through trees. FPV drones then shift from wide observation to focused hunting. Pilots follow likely withdrawal routes and check nearby cover where a launcher could be parked while crews wait for the next firing window. Forest concealment slows visual detection from the ground, yet from above it creates predictable hiding zones where large vehicles must fit between trunks and terrain limits. This turns concealment into a constraint rather than a shield. In one sequence, a grad launcher was located after these surface clues led drones to a concealed position just off the firing area. An FPV carrying a grenade approached from above and released the payload onto the launcher, which triggered an immediate detonation of onboard rockets. The explosion removed the system in seconds and erased the ammunition that had been prepared for follow-up strikes. The engagement ended before any counteraction could begin. A second launcher nearby followed a different path but reached the same outcome. Initial damage from a grenade disabled the vehicle without fully destroying it, which left a brief window where recovery might have been possible. Instead of pulling back, the position remained exposed, and a kamikaze FPV from a neighboring unit was directed onto the target. The final strike completed the destruction, leaving no usable equipment behind. This sequence highlights coordination rather than chance. Multiple drone teams shared detection cues and target status, which allowed pressure to continue until the system was fully neutralized. No single drone decided the result on its own. Each action built on the previous step, from reading launch traces to confirming damage and assigning the final strike. Beyond rocket launchers, FPV drones are also able to detect and strike armored vehicles, and recent footage shows tanks becoming targets once they pause, reposition, or move along exposed routes. In several sequences, drones first spot tracked vehicles near tree lines or along dirt roads, where tanks slow down to adjust formation or wait for orders. A T-72 is seen moving forward briefly, then stopping behind partial cover while infantry disperses. The FPV circles at a safe distance, drops lower, and lines up from the rear quarter where engine decks and thinner armor are exposed. Moments later, the drone commits and impacts the vehicle, triggering fire around the engine area as the crew abandons the tank. In other footage, T-80 tanks are caught during short relocations between firing positions. The vehicles accelerate to clear open ground, but the movement itself draws attention from above. FPV drones close in from low angles, adjusting direction to stay off the turret's line of sight. One strike hits the rear section, followed by smoke and secondary flames, forcing the tank to halt in the open. Some abandoned tanks have hatches remain open, no recovery vehicle approaches, and the tank is left burning on the route it tried to cross. These encounters show tanks being engaged not in set battles, but during brief moments of movement, hesitation, and exposure, where drones turn routine repositioning into a fatal sequence. Hardened shelters and ammunition stores are no longer safe once FPV drones enter the fight, because precision strikes now reach spaces that were designed to resist traditional fire. Across Donetsk Oblast, FPV teams have shifted attention toward dugouts and supply points where Russian infantry store weapons, explosives, and basic equipment. These locations are usually placed below ground and reinforced with logs, soil, and layers of cover, which makes them difficult to damage with artillery alone. Under normal conditions, such structures allow units to survive shelling and return to action once fire lifts. The battlefield dynamic changes once FPV drones appear overhead. Instead of attacking the roof or surrounding Earth, operators guide drones directly toward entrances or exposed openings that lead inside. The approach is careful and deliberate, since the goal is not to collapse the shelter from above, but to place the strike where stored materials amplify the blast. When the drone reaches the opening, the engagement ends in seconds rather than minutes. Footage from these attacks shows how narrow entry points become critical weak spots. A single drone entering the space can detonate ammunition, grenades, or propellant stored nearby, which turns the shelter itself into a source of destruction. What was built to protect personnel instead magnifies damage once internal supplies ignite. The result is not limited to one position, because shock and fire often spread to adjacent storage areas. In several recorded sequences, an initial detonation triggered a chain reaction that moved through connected dugouts or nearby caches. Replacement takes time, planning, and safe transport, all of which become harder under constant aerial watch. The impact on unit behavior is immediate. After such strikes, nearby forces often abandon prepared shelters and disperse equipment to reduce the risk of similar losses. That response creates new problems, because scattered supplies slow resupply and complicate coordination during active engagements. Commanders face a choice between concentrating material for efficiency or spreading it thin to reduce exposure, and neither option fully solves the threat. Another visible pattern is how FPV pressure limits recovery after an attack. Once a shelter is hit, drones often remain in the area, watching for movement from survivors or repair teams. These actions reshape the logistical layer of the fight, rather than just the front line. Ammunition that never reaches firing positions cannot support assaults, and units forced to operate with reduced stocks lose flexibility under pressure. Over time, repeated losses in rear shelters weaken the ability to hold ground, even if manpower remains available. The chain reaction effect also carries psychological weight. Soldiers who believe a dugout offers safety may hesitate to occupy it once footage shows such positions turning into traps. That hesitation slows movement, increases exposure during pauses, and reduces confidence in prepared defenses. Each destroyed cache sends a message that no location near the front is beyond reach. Taken together, these strikes show how FPV drones are attacking the foundation of frontline endurance. By targeting shelters and ammunition rather than only exposed troops, they convert defensive infrastructure into liabilities. The loss is counted not just in casualties, but in the steady removal of stored strength that armies depend on to keep fighting. Supply routes are becoming the most dangerous part of the front line, because FPV drones are steadily turning movement itself into a trigger for attack. Along key approach roads near the front line, Ukrainian FPV teams focus less on static positions and more on vehicles that keep units alive and connected. Trucks carrying ammunition, food, fuel, and spare parts are tracked once they enter exposed stretches, while motorcycles and light vehicles are watched as they weave through forest edges and open ground. These platforms are not heavily protected, yet they remain essential for daily operations, which places them under constant pressure from above. Drone footage shows that roads once used for routine resupply are now under near-continuous aerial observation. FPV operators wait for vehicles to slow at turns, narrow passages, or damage sections because these moments reduce escape options. When a strike follows, it often happens before the crew understands they have been detected. The engagement is short, direct, and decisive, which makes every trip forward feel uncertain. Motorcycles deserve special attention, since they are widely used to move personnel and small loads quickly. Their speed offers some advantage, but it also exposes riders in open terrain where cover is limited. FPV drones close distance rapidly, and sudden direction changes make defensive fire unreliable. Once contact begins, riders have little room to maneuver, and the outcome is often decided within seconds. Light vehicles face a similar problem. They are easier to conceal than trucks, yet their routes are predictable because they must follow paths that can support wheels. FPV crews learn these patterns over time. which allows them to anticipate movement rather than react to it. This turns logistics into a repeated test rather than a single risky action. The effect of these attacks is not measured by a single dramatic loss. Instead, damage builds through repetition. One truck destroyed today forces another run tomorrow, which draws more attention and increases exposure. Each motorcycle lost reduces flexibility for quick shifts between positions. Over days and weeks, this pressure slows the flow of supplies and stretches response times across the unit. As routes become less reliable, commanders face difficult choices. Convoys can move at night to reduce visibility, yet thermal sensors erase much of that advantage. Another consequence is how disrupted logistics affect frontline behavior. Units receiving supplies late or in reduced amounts are less willing to push forward, since ammunition and fuel reserves become uncertain. Rotation schedules slip, wounded evacuation slows, and coordination between elements weakens. None of these effects are sudden, but together they change how aggressively forces can operate. FPV presence also limits recovery after an attack. Once a vehicle is hit, drones often remain nearby, watching for assistance or repair attempts. Crews that stop to help risk becoming new targets, which leaves damaged equipment abandoned and reduces the chance of salvage. Each loss therefore extends beyond the initial strike. Over time, roads turn into filters rather than links. Movement is no longer a simple task, but a calculated risk taken under constant observation. This pressure does not collapse supply lines in a single moment, yet it steadily erodes their reliability. The result is a front line that advances slower, reacts later, and operates with less confidence than before. The larger question raised by this pattern is how long sustained operations can continue when every delivery becomes a gamble, and whether adaptation can restore safe passage under skies that are never empty. What stands out at the end of this sequence is not a single strike or one dramatic explosion, but a clear pattern that keeps repeating across the front line and leaves little room for doubt. FPV drones are no longer playing a supporting role. They are shaping how the front line works, from the forest at night to dugouts meant to protect troops, and all the way back to the roads that carry food, fuel, and ammunition. Movement is watched, shelter is tested, supply is interrupted. Each layer that once offered safety now carries its own risk. The real damage goes beyond destroyed vehicles or lost soldiers. Russian forces are being pushed into fighting with fewer safe zones, shorter planning windows, and limited freedom to move. The larger question moving forward is not whether Ukraine will keep using FPV drones, because that answer already seems clear. Will low-altitude air defense, electronic jamming, or new movement tactics catch up fast enough? Or will the gap continue to widen as drone numbers grow and operators gain more experience? This shift may decide not just how battles are fought, but how long sustained operations remain possible under skies that never look away. What comes next is still open, and that is where this story gets more interesting. If this kind of clear battlefield analysis matters, like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to Military Force for more updates on modern warfare, real combat, and the politics behind it.